I gotta meet you guys on George.
Just exit it. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, so it looks like we've got a good portion of people here, so I'll get started. Oh. So on behalf of the Economic Developers Council of Ontario, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's Trade and Tariff Virtual Roundtable session. I'm not pleased that we have to host it, but glad that everybody is here to participate. It's wonderful to see how many people have registered for today and are looking for whatever content they can get for it. As you are aware, the imposition of tariffs and the shifts in trade policy have become central to the discussions around global commerce. And over the past month or so, the trade dynamics between Canada and the United States have seen significant disruption as new tariffs and trade barriers have been introduced, paused, started, pause again, which is affecting both imports and trade. These changes have rippled through our industries, challenges the way we think about supply chains, costs, and market access. As Ontario's economic development community, we are particularly focused on the impacts these tariffs or changes have on our business and communities. Our industries, ranging from manufacturing and agriculture to technology and services, rely heavily on the United States as our key trading partner. And the uncertainties surrounding tariff impositions, trade agreements, and protectionist policies have created both challenges and opportunities that we now have to navigate. This roundtable discussion aims to offer a collaborative space where we can exchange ideas, share experiences, pose questions, and explore the challenges and opportunities that these changes are presenting for Ontario's economy. EDCO's goal is to support you, our members. We aim to learn how we can best support you and what you're looking for from us. And we will endeavor to find any answers to questions that you pose today. We are recording today's session, and notes will be available early next week on our website. We have another session planned for March 21st, and that has limited space available now. This session also filled up quite fast. So throughout today, please feel free to ask questions. You can ask them with asking verbally, or there is a question and answer section. And before we get started, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to Brock for his participation and support today. Would like to thank you for your continued support of EDCO as well as economic development across our country, our province, and nationally. And to our members, your engagement and contributions are vital in shaping the way forward in this complex and ever-changing landscape. Anything we can do to help, please share with us, and we will endeavor, as I said, to find answers to your questions and to connect you where needed. I know that some of our ministry partners are on the call today to hear what you're saying, so please feel free to speak up and share wherever you can. I'm now going to mute myself and pass it over to Brock, who will facilitate today's session.
Excellent. Thank you, Stephanie. And I just want to make sure you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
And as we launch into this, I'm going to start to share my screen. I have just a very small number of slides that I want to kick things off with, because today's not about sort of presentations and sharing content in one direction. I think we're really literally trying to find a way to make this a roundtable. We need to hear what communities are struggling with and wrestling with and worrying about. So that we can start to kind of understand where we have common concerns and where we maybe have some unique concerns to figure out. But we also need to start sharing just best practices and great ideas about how we're going to do things and move forward from there. So very briefly, I'm going to start off with a few slides here. Stephanie, maybe you can let me know if those are showing.
Yes, they are. You're good.
And is it in presentation mode?
No.
No. All right. Let me just. How about there?
Now it is. Yeah.
Perfect. So Stephanie said this is the first of several of these events that EDCO is doing, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that they've asked me to help out with this particular iteration. We're talking about sort of trade and tariffs, and obviously top of mind for everybody. I guess I'd add another T into that mix as we sort of think about what's really going on. This is a discussion of Trump, trade, and tariffs in a lot of ways, because he's sort of central to this whole discussion, and obviously what comes out of the White House is really sort of shaping a lot of what we need to be thinking about. And, you know, none of us likes the fact that we're in this position that we're in currently. The Wall Street Journal recently called this the dumbest trade war in history. And the Prime Minister made a reference to that the other day. And there really is a sense that there's not a lot of common sense in this whole undertaking, in this whole process. And yet somehow we find ourselves caught up in the middle of it, and we have to sort of deal with it anyway. And I think part of the challenge in this is that we don't really have a good sense on why we're in this trade war, that the number of messages, the number of sort of suggestions of why we're facing tariffs, why we're in the midst of this sort of sense that that something's being done to Canada, just varies, and it keeps changing over time. And we'll finally figure out that, hey, maybe it isn't one of the things on this list; it's something else on this list, and then, you know, day later we've returned to one of the previous topics. So there is this sense that it's difficult to kind of respond to the challenges that we're facing when we don't know what the real challenge is that underpins everything that's happening. And I think, you know, part of it here is, as this goes on, we're kind of learning that maybe there isn't a lot of clarity as to what's going on in the sense of the White House. So this was one of the quotes that struck me. This is from way back in history on Tuesday, Wednesday afternoon, the week's starting to blur together. So Trump and Trudeau had a telephone conversation, and Trump's readout of the event issued by the White House after the fact included the great comment that Trudeau was unable to tell me when the Canadian election is taking place, which made me curious, like, what's going on here? I then realized he is trying to use this issue to stay in power. Good luck, Justin. You know, can you imagine a more fundamental misunderstanding of how the parliamentary system works and how, you know, the sort of the current state of politics in Canada, that we may well have a new prime minister in 3 days, let alone, you know, sort of imagining that somebody's trying to hang on to power here. And I think part of what creates this sense of chaos is that the understanding of what's happening in the White House on the U.S. side of the border is just fundamentally different than the understanding of what's happening on this side of the border. So I like to think of this as, you know, just another week with the chaos monkeys. Where am I getting this notion, the chaos monkeys? Well, there's a Nobel Prize winning economist named Paul Krugman who recently wrote an article called "The Chaos Monkeys Have Already Taken Over the Zoo." And this is his take on the Trump administration sort of coming into office. He illustrated that with a really great image of what he was sort of thinking of in the context of the chaos monkeys. But I think this is what we've sort of lived over the last week, for example. So, you know, it's hard to believe, but when we go back, you know, 5 days to Monday, we didn't even have tariffs yet. The notion was, hey, tariffs are coming if you don't do something. Now, what the something was kind of unclear, but, you know, we had this threat of tariffs on Monday. On Tuesday, we were told, you know, you didn't do enough. Say hi to the tariffs. They're now in place. Wednesday, we got, well, yeah, except for the automotive sector. We didn't really mean that as part of the tariffs. Yesterday was, no, we were just kidding. We're going to sort of save the tariffs for April, right? Like, don't worry about them for at least 3 more weeks. And this is the sense that it makes it really difficult for our communities to respond to any of this when it changes every single day. Like, how are we supposed to sort of stay on top of this? Our businesses, many of our economic interests are kind of looking to us for answers, for solutions, for information. And it's just hard to kind of stay ahead of the curve when the story is changing literally every 24 hours. Now, I do want to say it could be worse. I mean, there's crazier things that have come out of the White House in the last couple of weeks. But nonetheless, we kind of have to interpret some of what's happening for our communities. And I do think that the kind of the resources that are out there are getting a little bit better as we go along. And so there is more and more that we can kind of point to and draw on as we start to think about this. So the Conference Board of Canada has been doing some really interesting work to try to understand where geographically tariffs are most likely to have large impacts. We see Ontario there as the 4th most affected province, although you know, we're marginally better than the top 3. It's not by a lot, but it does sort of suggest that we're starting to see information about the actual economic impact of tariffs. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce has done some really interesting work that kind of dives into which municipalities or census metropolitan areas are likely to kind of see the largest impacts. If you're in Windsor or Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, this is not a good news story. It's a little bit better if you're in Sudbury or in London, but we are starting to at least get some data that tells us a little bit about our relative exposure to what's going on. I think part of the challenge with this is it's still not hugely specific in terms of the kinds of things that we can do. So I do think that we're going to see more and more information over the next few weeks that starts to get into the toolkit kind of stuff. And here's a recent resource from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, for example, that's designed to kind of show Ontario companies 10 things that they can start to do to kind of prep for, survive the tariff situation. Now, I got to say, this is still pretty high level stuff, right? Like lobby for support, monitor currency fluctuations, right? This is not the most practical hands-on advice, but it's a signpost that we're starting to move towards more practical kinds of information. And so the more that we can stay on top of this to share this with our business communities, the better a position that we're in. And I think some communities have made some really great steps in terms of building resources to help their local businesses kind of access this sort of information as it emerges. So this is a page from the City of Welland's website, their economic development site. And what they've basically done is to try to collect together a series of those resources and information sources that are out there that would benefit their local businesses. And they're updating this on a regular basis so that as new information comes out, as new resources become available, they can kind of create a one-stop shop within their community to access this kind of stuff. I think this is a great example of what we can do given our sort of technology resources. I'll also point out that the County of Dufferin has been doing something similar, but in the context of kind of a series of bi-weekly workshops and sessions that they're hosting for local businesses, bringing them together both in person and online to kind of share the same sort of information. So whether you do this digitally or whether you do it in person, there is this sense that there's more out there, and part of our job as economic developers is to become interpreters. I spoke Wednesday at the Southern Ontario Tourism Conference, and I also sort of suggested that one of the things that we can be doing is to kind of dust off some of the COVID era strategies that we had at the local level. What were our challenges during COVID? We were worried that local businesses wouldn't have customers, that as we sort of shut things down, we were really trying to emphasize this notion of buy local. That's a huge part of the current sort of commitment that Canadians are making to buying Canadian. So this might be an opportunity to kind of bring back some of those campaigns and strategies that we've already put in place and that we've already prepared to sort of say, hey, we did this during COVID, let's dust off those plans and sort of bring them back. I think that applies in the context of tourism marketing as well. We're hearing increasingly that Canadians are not going to travel to the United States, or making that specific decision in the context of the trade dispute. So there are about 21 million Canadians who typically travel to the United States for tourism purposes every year. They spend about $21 billion. If we think about 10% of that market deciding not to go to the US, that represents a pretty significant opportunity for domestic tourism. And if we can reach 20% or 30% rather than 10, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar domestic tourism opportunity. And much like we did during COVID, when we talked about staycations and kind of, keeping people local to sort of support the survival of the tourism sector, I think a lot of that planning can now be dusted off and brought back in the current context as well. And then there's one other sort of tool that I would sort of point to. This is some recent work coming out of Deloitte. I've got the URL here. I will share these slides with Stephanie, and she can distribute them out to folks. But if you just want to Google Deloitte and tariffs, it should come in near the top of the search results. There's a recent 8-page kind of summary that came out from Deloitte that I think does two things. The first is is that it looks at different sectors of the economy in Canada to sort of reflect on which industries are most vulnerable, which are the ones that are most likely to kind of feel the impacts of tariffs. That might help us prioritize some of our outreach with our local businesses. But more importantly, they've created a series of tools that local businesses can use to kind of assess their vulnerability to tariffs and come up with a bit of a work plan or an action plan to kind of address the risks that they'll be facing. And they divided that into three areas. The sell side, that is those things that companies can do to kind of address what might be happening with their customers and clients. The buy side, that is those things that companies can do to kind of reflect on vulnerabilities and risks within their supply chains and how they can try to overcome those. And the inside, the things that the companies can do in terms of their internal management structures and processes to try to prepare themselves for what we're facing. It's an 8-page document. There's some limitations to how deep this can go, but I do think that this is an indication of the types of tools that we're likely to see more of over the next few weeks. That as we get deeper into these discussions, the information and the toolkits that will be available to us are going to get stronger and stronger and more specific in the things they can do and the ways that we can use them. And again, I think, the big thing here is that all of us kind of have to share our current thinking. I've switched a lot of the attention on my own YouTube channel to sort of thinking about these issues specifically and trying to kind of share information. But I think as Welland has done, as Dufferin has done, and now as EDCO is doing, the opportunity to just create spaces where we can kind of share information and talk about these questions is critical. And as we discover what works and what doesn't work moving forward, that we can start to build a bit of a better strategy at the local level for how we pursue economic development supports in the current situation. So hopefully there's a little bit of information in all of it that's useful, that's helpful, that gets us thinking in the right directions. But I want to kind of open up the discussion now. The point is that we sort of share ideas together. So let me maybe start just by asking if anyone here has come across tools or resources that they have found have been particularly useful in the current context. So you can unmute and jump into the conversation. There are opportunities to pose questions in the chat or Q&A. You can raise a hand in the raise button, and we'll do our best to kind of see who's out there that's got some things to add to the discussion. And let's start with what we found that is useful. John Regan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Brock. And I just wanted to say, I was at the Southern Tourism Conference, and again, all the tools that you shared have actually come in very, very helpful, even over the last couple of days, for sure. I guess maybe a lack of tools, and I think you touched on it too, is we really don't know what we don't know. And, for example, I don't think even the feds know the full impact of the tariff. So, we had a question from an automotive production company, is the tariffs affecting auto parts or just finished automobiles? And they don't know. And does it affect trailers? And then we don't know. So there's still a lot of things we don't know. But one of the not dilemmas, but one of the things that we found, or what happened here in Norfolk County, is there was a notice of motion last week for economic development and communications to put together a buy local campaign, and only to buy local, buy Norfolk County. And of course, I think most of us can't support something like that. I think we need to really focus. We know that's a double-edged sword. I think we need to focus on Canadian first and Ontario, but look for those connections. So I'm looking for tools, I think, to how do we continue to support Canadian maybe more unitedly, and that seems to be happening holistically anyways, or at a grassroots level, that where patriotism is at an ultimate high. But also the tools as they become available. It would be really nice if there was just one clearinghouse of tools so we can go to and then have them verified so that we can get that information. And then also our council is looking for stats, like really good stats on what do we export and what's that impact on the tariff. And of course, we just don't know what that impact is. So I think we're always in this, our question right now is buy local, like we don't get that. We don't support that necessarily, other than kind of from that Canadian perspective. The tools, we need more of them and more relevant tools. So I'll just stop there. I think I've asked several questions now, but the tools that you provided have been super helpful.
That's great, John. I appreciate that. I'm just looking at the chat. There is a comment with a couple of additional tools from Agam. I'll maybe circle back in a few minutes to get you to comment on those. But any kind of immediate suggestions, thoughts, responses to the questions that John has raised? Karen Bittner.
Hi, gang. John, what you said hit the nail on the head. I'm from Blind River, so we're population 3,500 smack dab between the Sioux and Sudbury. What would be really helpful for us, as I'm observing, it looks like we have a multitude of cyclones where people are all trying to solve this problem. And we're going to probably see 444 council resolutions saying buy local in the next month, which it's a knee-jerk reaction. What I'm gathering from this with my emergency planning hat on is that we're teetering on a financial emergency similar to a pandemic. If EDCO could help us out with something that is a template with that buy Canadian, buy Ontario for our smaller communities, and some of the cities might take advantage of it too. If we're all posting the same type of branding and we're just inputting our own downtown graphic, but it has the power of your acronym in front of it, that would go a long way for our crew. And then I know within minutes, I could have 17 neighboring municipalities all using that same style of marketing, which then my other fear ties in my downtown local merchants that just bought all their product. That all got delivered. And if we have people saying, don't buy US, and then they start flipping over teacups and handles and they see USA, that merchant is out all of that capital for that stock right now. This can cripple them if it's not approached in the right demeanor. So we need to focus on the faces behind the businesses in our communities right now and not so much Trump. We work on that stuff in the back end, but the publicly facing stuff, if we could get EDCO's help to create those type of tools and we could all just click and drag into our Canva accounts, that would be something we could implement right away.
Excellent. Thank you, Karen. I think you both sort of touched on this notion that, too local is not necessarily the response here, that we do want to encourage buy Canadian. That ties into that discussion that we've had nationally about sort of reducing interprovincial trade barriers. And if we immediately rush to buy Blind River, buy Norfolk, we don't get to that discussion of reducing those interprovincial barriers, which I think is one of the positive things that we can be looking for in this context. But Karen, that notion that a lot of our small businesses have a lot of stock that's tied up from U.S. suppliers already is really interesting, and kind of thinking about ways to nuance the campaign a little bit at the local level to sort of make sure that we don't hurt those businesses is an important question. I see Elizabeth Hawkins with a hand up.
Thanks, Brock. I wanted to echo what Karen was saying. And one of the things that we've found over the last couple of days is that even though we're very lucky with a very well-educated council who are very dedicated to understanding the issues, very early on, we began to understand that they did not understand tariffs and supply chain and how things are connected. And so, to echo Karen's flag around, buy Canadian or buy, Blind River or buy Newmarket, you do sort of end up in a really tricky position. And so we've started to educate our council about, what does our local economy look like? So we were lucky enough, we have an employment survey that we've worked on with York Region, and we're able to highlight how many of our businesses are exporters and how many jobs are tied to those exports, to highlight that if you say, well, don't buy from an American company, 10% of our jobs in Newmarket are tied to exporting. And so I think one of the things that would be helpful is to sort of collect our knowledge about what these tariffs mean for local economies, and almost like a council primer or something like that we could share, because they are so inundated with other things that they don't have the bandwidth to learn enough to be able to adapt their phrasing. And I know lots of municipalities, us included, are starting to be asked to look at our procurement bylaws and how do you make it only buy Canadian? And then we have to flag, we can't actually get some of the things in Canada right now. But I think starting to build out our knowledge of for counselors especially, and even senior leadership, to be able to help them understand, to help them make public statements that are supportive of all of our local economies and not just, specifically Canadian products necessarily.
Susan Gardner is saying in the chat that she loves the idea of the council primer as well. So that's definitely a good takeaway. Let me just quickly go to Chris Watson in Huron County. You posted a link to your local toolkit. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you built that, how you decided what goes in and what doesn't go in, and then from there, when Stuart's or when Chris is done, I'll move over to Stuart McFadden.
Thanks so much, Brock. Yeah, I posted a link in the chat there that you guys can just get to. We've been very, I think, keenly aware of Karen, your comments are, I think, are definitely resonating with the feeling that we're feeling here as well. So just to give you a sense of where we're actually at, if you kind of draw a line due west from Kitchener until you hit Lake Huron, that's kind of where we are on the flat back of Southern Ontario. Big agricultural sector in our county. So we really wanted to, I mean, buy local, buy Huron is certainly something that, our small business and local tourism folks are sort of, it's a drum we're beating all year typically. But again, with the as chaos, as I think Brock actually put it, we sort of tweak the messaging to focus on by Ontario, by Canadian. In addition to some of these resources that are just online, we've also just tried to help connect local, like our businesses, with whatever it takes to get labeled or whatever certified as produced in Canada, made in Canada, as well as Ontario Foodland. Just any of those options for sort of officially being recognized as a Canadian producer, Canadian manufacturer. But in addition to that, certainly our local Chamber of Commerce has really taken a big stand against. I mean, we started to, hear about calls for boycotting, American companies, American chains, and stuff like that. And our local Chamber of Commerce really took a stand against that, sort of saying, boycott the boycott. Just to sort of highlight the fact that, our local Walmart store, for example, it employs local people, it's managed locally, it buys local suppliers from local suppliers and stuff. So throwing these folks under the bus really isn't going to solve the problem that we're in. Anyway, Brock, do you feel like I've covered everything there? I'm worried I'm starting to sound a little rambly, so feel free to just give me the cane.
No, not at all. That's great, Chris. I appreciate that. And while you were chatting, Luke from Muskoka posted a similar toolkit that they've developed as well. So great to see that these are starting to emerge. Stuart, I promised we would go to you next.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and good morning. Stuart, last night our mayor called an emergency meeting of council to discuss tariffs and impacts, and I agree with everybody here that there's just a lot, like John, we just don't know a lot of things, right? But going back to what we did learn in COVID, my advice to council and to everyone who was there was let's not overreact. We need to stay calm. It changes daily. You need to find out what the sickness is before you can provide a cure. And again, the whole focus on just buy local, the unintended consequences of that are huge, because huge ag, cattle, hogs, auto manufacturing here. And while you might not like the brand of where it is canned, the product is actually coming from your backyard. We got about $15 million worth of cucumbers produced in CK that go over to Hartung in Michigan and they send it back in glass jars with Bix on the front. So just remember, again, those unintended consequences. So it was a good conversation. There was a lot of pressure from people in the community. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? My advice to council is we need to stay in our lane, know what we can do locally, And then as programs come out, I mean, the feds have said they're going to have a UI program. There's probably going to be and programs for businesses impacted. The province has said they're going to make money available for infrastructure projects. Right now, our engineering group is dusting off a whole bunch of applications that were denied in the past and getting them ready in case there is a tranche of money that comes out for that. So we need to stay in our lane, stay focused. And I know that seems what else can we do is just the mental health side of these people that are living in unknown times, right? Making sure that we take care of our neighbor. And I think that's a positive message that came out last night with council was there's people wondering, I just bought a house. Am I going to get laid off? If you talk to Flavio Volpe, we're an hour and a half away from shutting Windsor down not too long ago. So again, things change daily. So we got to we have a website that we're creating. We're promoting staycations on the tourism side. Having a repository for consistent messaging amongst the EDCO group, I think, is a wonderful idea. And how we go about that, I don't know. But we need to keep that up to date. We need to keep it relevant and make sure it has the information that is required, not fluffy stuff. But because it changes daily, we need to update it daily. So that's my comment. If there's a place where we can go so that we're all singing from the same songbook, I think that's what I'd like to see going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting, Stuart. And as useful as the kind of the toolkits are at the local level, if we end up, I think there's 444 municipalities in Ontario. If we end up with 444 toolkits, there's a lot of duplicated effort there. So the more that we can kind of share and centralize some of this process as well, maybe some kind of a widget that can be built in to allow communities to do this stuff and update it daily could be really useful. I'm looking at a question in the Q&A section from Gord Duff related specifically to the automotive sector. Gord, do you want to pose that generally and see if there's somebody here who knows?
Sure. Thank you, Brock. Yeah, I'm in Minto in northern Wellington. Our largest employer, largest taxpayer by far, is TG Minto, which primarily feeds into Toyota Cambridge, also Lexus. They do Honda Alliston. We have neighbors in North Perth, in Elora, in Arthur, countless small communities in our area. And again, everyone's mentioned things keep changing. So I know we've done many plant tours and that they send their parts. Again, I think they're representative of that quoted figure that one part goes across the border 8 times. So I know there's talk of Ford, GM, and Stellantis getting a temporary reprieve. I believe it applies to these other companies, but I'm not sure. And when we know Trump's game is to get Toyota Cambridge and Honda Alliston to move to Michigan, but that's not happening immediately and hopefully not at all. So I just wondered if you or anyone on the line, how are the auto parts people who are not primarily part of the big three, are they being dealt with the same or are they different?
My understanding at the moment is it's all being dealt with the same because nobody's sort of gotten to the granularity of this to kind of separate them out. Certainly the reprieve on the auto sector seems to have come from the big three going to visit the White House and having some pointed discussions. And so if that approach continues, it may put the American automakers in a different place than the Japanese or the Korean automakers. But at the moment, I think things are sort of one size fits all. But I'm happy to be corrected if anybody here has better information.
And I know when we say Japanese and Korean, we may mean American because it's going to their plants in the US. It's complicated, and I think you've hit the nail on the head. Canadians can only do so much. The Democrats could do a hell of a lot more, but they're pretty infinite so far. It's going to take American business to actually fight this thing, and we got to do what we can, focus on what we can control. But no matter what, you can't change economics with an executive order. And the sooner he realizes that, the better.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that, Gordon. I think, key question, because as I often sort of reflect on the typical gas-powered car that we build in Ontario has 30,000 components, right? And trying to trace all 30,000 pieces back and forth between the various sort of sources and distribution patterns is challenging. So we're going to have a lot of these questions if this continues. Alyssa, you've been very patient. You've got a hand up there. Let me go to you next.
Thank you very much, Brock, and I appreciate this session. I'm just going to move to a place that's a little less quiet. I'm out of the office today. The first thing I wanted to say is that I chaired the International Advisory Committee for IEDC, and we have had a special meeting on tariffs. I know and we had our first regular meeting yesterday. There's a number of Ontario economic developers, a lot of Canadians on that committee. There has been some pressure I know EDCO is affiliated with IEDC, and there has been some pressure on getting IEDC to advocate. They are, after all, an advocacy organization. Of course, the bulk of their funding comes from federal sources, so they're kind of caught in an odd place. They're looking to diversify that funding because the strategic plan is really to be more global in focus. So I just wanted to put that out there. There is an awareness. There's a lot of discussion there to look for ways that members, including EDCO, who they work with, Nathan, the chair, is doing a cross-Canada listening tour right now, where he's actually meeting with the heads of BC, EDA, EDCO, EDAC, EDA Alberta, to find ways that members within the association can support each other. So I just wanted to put that out there to let everybody know that this is actually happening. And if you have ideas for how that would be beneficial for you, I am very happy to bring that back to the committee and look for ways that we can explore that within the larger global association as well. The second thing I wanted to say, and this is more medium and long term in terms of opportunities for Ontario and Canadian businesses. And if you're a follower of historian Heather Cox Richardson, which I really encourage you to follow her on Facebook or Substack, because she does these daily analyses that are very historical and placed in context. She pointed out that there has been a massive gutting of science and healthcare funding. She talks about in today's post, particularly in terms of cancer research. I can tell you this on the ground. I have a daughter, a researcher at Harvard in public health. Of the 25 researchers on her floor, only 7 are left. In the middle of healthcare projects, funding, grants, they are just being canceled. At the same time, I have another daughter at the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab in Caltech. That also, people are being fired, doctors are being fired, faculty members. In terms of medium to long-term opportunity for Canadian businesses, there is literally nowhere in the US for these people to go right now. And this is happening at every institution, every hospital, every research facility across the country. And these are trained experts, proven experts in their fields. Just something to think about as we direct, if you have any businesses in your region, in healthcare, in science, aerospace, really across the board, there are opportunities for Canadian businesses. And we saw that a little bit during Trump's first administration, where people did come north of the border. They're looking for other places to go. And so there's some interesting things to think about. Thanks, Ellen, for sharing that. And I just wanted to let people know that I mean, it's terrible because this is a crisis, and I don't mean to be glib, but we also don't want to let a crisis go to waste. I mean, if there are opportunities within this chaos for Canadians and Ontario companies to make progress, we got to take advantage of them.
Excellent. Thank you, Alyssa. And maybe as a couple of great suggestions there. One very, very practical on the talent attraction side of things. But Stephanie, maybe something for the next of these sessions on the 21st to sort of see whether some of those IEDC folks might sit in on something like this. We'll have a few of our colleagues from south of the border join the discussion. I do have a number of other hands springing up, so let me go to Matthew from the Ministry of Economic Development.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to chime in here. I'm Matthew. I actually work in the minister's office for Minister Vic Fideli, and specifically on trade. So I'm the minister's trade and technology advisor, and my colleague Kent is somewhere in this call. He does all of our stakeholder relations stuff in the minister's office. And just wanted to say thanks everyone for sharing kind of all of this stuff. I think it's been like we just got through a long election period. Well, I guess it was more like a short election period. So, we've kind of come right back into the swing of things this week, immediately hit with these tariffs and then not tariffs and tariffs again. So it's been quite challenging for me and the rest of the folks on my team to kind of really wrap our head around everything and try to plan effectively. So I hate to sound not as confident as maybe some of you guys would like, but it is, an ever moving and fluctuating situation. So just like for business, for government, we are really kind of flying by the seat of our pants when it comes to figuring out what's happening and what those responses are, and and hearing from from different stakeholders here and in the United States as well. I think some of your suggestions are really great, and I just kind of wanted to touch on some stuff here about interprovincial trade barriers, since that's sort of one of the main things that I focus on. This is something that we're going to be taking seriously, and I know this is not, deregulating interprovincial trade is a contentious topic depending on the industry that you work in and the community that you're from. But I think this is something that the Premier and Minister Fideli are quite, and Premier Houston in Nova Scotia as well, and lots of other premiers across the country, Wab Kinew in Manitoba, David Eby in BC, Danielle Smith in Alberta, they've all kind of spoken about this. And while it's hard to do things kind of multilaterally across the country, we know that there are certain things we can kind of get a move on right away, like, immediately kind of looking into how Ontario can implement sort of mutual recognition of different regulations across the country, just sort of unilaterally here. So I think that's something that you'll probably see a lot more of in the near future, is a focus on that. And I think secondly, I hate to not have more information for everyone on what our response will look like. It sounds like, once cabinet is sworn in, government's really going to kick off, get things sort of going with a budget and that sort of stuff more closely to the end of March. But right now, in the meantime, I think just to sort of prepare for what your community and your industry can kind of expect, the Premier did put out a platform sort of towards the end of the election that outlines sort of, some pretty high level indications of some programs that we're going to be looking into doing, like an Ontario Together Trade Fund, very similar to the Ontario Together Fund from COVID, different funds for worker protections to support sort of cash flow for businesses. So there will be things coming, and I, hate to leave everyone sort of in the dark about stuff, but a lot of this is, has to come together quickly. So myself and Kent, we are, we're back to work for the most part, and please feel free to reach out, and we're always happy to chat about any of this kinds of stuff, because we find all of this helpful to actually sort of build these responses. And while we're still technically in caretaker mode, meaning we can't necessarily direct the public service to kind of work on any of this yet, it's coming. We're getting back into the swing of things, so we're always happy to chat.
That's perfect, Matthew. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for being here to kind of listen to the discussion as we go along. I will say that, as the province looks at programs, you've got, 1,000 technical experts in this organization that can really advise you on very practical things that could roll out as programs. So interprovincial trade barriers, something we deal with every day in these roles, right? So lots of ideas about how we could overcome that. Export diversification, that's something we're talking to with our companies about every single day. So I'm sure if you're looking to kind of design some programs or projects, you could get a long list of very specific, very practical ideas from this particular group. So let's keep that aspect of the conversation going. Dimitri, you've been waiting very patiently here, so let's go to you next.
Thanks, Brock. My question was actually specifically around the interprovincial trade barriers. It's just going to bring it up and ask why it seems the national tariffs can be changed overnight, but it's what's the timeline on this interprovincial trade barriers being removed, reduced, changed? It seems that, anyways, just trying to think about what the timeline is. Is there anything that as a county or municipalities, EDCs, EDCO as an organization, we can do if we believe that's one of the larger impacts that we can have? Is there anything we can do to support the changing of those or reducing them? And yeah, just trying to get an idea of maybe from Matthew or Brock, if you know more about what the impact of changing those would be and what the timeline for that would be, if we think that that is an avenue for dealing with all of these trade negotiations or tariffs changing all the time between us and the US.
Matthew, any quick thoughts on that before we open it up, maybe more generally for some notions?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Dimitri, for that question. And I'm, I obviously everybody has their own kind of personal view on this, but I'm definitely a big proponent of removing as many interprovincial trade barriers as we can. And the timeline is so hard to say because it really relies on sort of unanimous consent from most provinces to actually kind of push things through. Like I mentioned, a lot of the stuff that Ontario as a province can do unilaterally comes with recognizing regulations that, for example, trucking, and we've been working on interprovincial trade for a long time. Now it just sort of seems that the pace has hastened. It's kind of weird because we have the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, which sort of, is like an overarching thing that combines all of our provinces into one framework. But then within that, there are like sub trade agreements. So there's something called the New West Partnership called NUEPTA. That's like BC, Alberta, and I believe Manitoba. And we wanted to ascend to that within the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, but that required us to do a whole bunch of different things like liberalize alcohol sales so that, alcohol from BC could be sold in Ontario and whatnot. We are really interested in completely sort of deregulating financial services across the country, but there was a minister in Saskatchewan who was specifically kind of against doing that without a person to government dispute settlement mechanism. So there's all these little sort of twists and turns everywhere that have to be broken down before they can all be deregulated. So one thing that we did recently was adopt mutual recognition of trucking sort of regulation across the country. So that was pretty easy to do because that just took kind of us and the other provinces in our Council of International Trade meetings to simply agree that a trucker in BC is probably just as safe as one in Ontario and vice versa. So mutual recognition is something that we can do quickly. And I think in timelines, I wish I could give you a good answer, Dimitri, but I would like to say like, this will be a main focus of us within the next couple of months is trying to work on these. We had interprovincial trade meetings in February. We had them in January and we had them in the fall, and we have deadlines set for updating on kind of all of those, measures of progress, whether that's financial services, mutual recognition on a whole bunch of different programs and projects. And like, I'm hoping within the next year, we'll have made a lot of a bigger movement than we've probably done in the last few, but I don't know other than that.
That's great. Thank you, Matthew. I might just sort of comment that specific provisions and changes in regulations to permit different levels of interprovincial trade are one thing, and a deliberate decision not to enforce rules is also a possibility. And so that's something that could happen much faster if we sort of make the decision that, hey, we're really not going to enforce these barriers on the interprovincial shipments of alcohol, for example, that there may be very quick things that individual businesses and sectors can start to do to move on these things, knowing that the regulatory change might be longer in its process. I can't necessarily get somebody who works for the government to say, yeah, that makes sense, but it may be part of how we approach this as well. It's only taken us 75 years to kind of get to this stage of the discussion, but lots to work out. Anybody else with any sort of specific insights into the interprovincial issue before I go on to other hands? I do see a couple of posts in the chat about that. All right, well, we can certainly have that sort of come back to the discussion as we go along, but I have Sean next, and then Andrew Redden waiting in the wings after Sean.
I'll try to be quick. I know we're on the last 10 minutes, but I just wanted to go back to the buy local or the messaging on Made in Canada. So from previous discussions with a few companies this week, they have still a lot of customers in the US that they just have to make sure that messaging is targeted towards the right customers. So, they don't want to lose that market quite yet. So they just want to be very cautious of how that comes out for their existing customer base. So depending on the company, some might be able to absorb the financials or the tariff for a certain amount of time. So they're trying to prolong that as much as they can. But if you're selling into the US, and that's where the population base and the customers still are compared to Canada, that just has to make sure it's, making sure it's reading to the right customers. So if it's a US customer, maybe made in Canada, tone it down, I guess, on that sense. But if it's sold in Canada, boost that up. So there might be two different routes of trying to target your product in a way.
That's really interesting, Sean. Yeah, and I think that notion of how we message some of this south of the border is key. I learned about a company out of Quebec yesterday called Transcontinental Inc. They are North America's largest producer of comic books, and comic books are a low price item. You slap a 25% tariff on it, it makes a big difference in the pricing. They've basically said to their American customers they're going to eat the tariff for 90 days. So they'll absorb some of the risk and keep the industry flowing. And this has been getting them all sorts of positive credit south of the border for kind of saving that industry. So the way we think about communicating what we're going to do, I'm not saying Canadian companies can all eat 90 days worth of tariffs on something, but kind of taking some sort of a stand or communicating some sort of a message that's designed to appeal to your American partners or your American consumers and customers can be really interesting in terms of how this plays out in the longer run. So lots to think about there. Andrew, let's go in your direction now.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks, EDCO, for putting this on, and thank you, Brock. This is great for us because I think we're already aware the goalposts keep changing, so it's really hard to navigate this. So it's great to have everybody come together and share resources and information and best practices. I was just wondering, I think, Brock, you mentioned there was an information session or regular information sessions that one of the communities in Ontario was putting on, or an economic development office. I just wondered, the small business enterprise centers, I don't know if they've come up in this conversation. I don't think so. Just wondering, is there maybe a role for them? We have a lot of small businesses, of course. We're a very rural county. And so I like the idea of having something for them. And maybe it's a role for chambers of commerce, of course. But I just wondered about if there's anybody on the call that has any examples of their small business center putting something like that on. So it's just a thought I had.
Do we have any SBECs on the call? Anybody who wants to pipe up on that front? Rhonda.
Hi there. Thanks, everyone. I just wanted to say that in Peterborough, we are working with our SBEC as well as the Chamber of Commerce to host monthly at this point, for ongoing trade sessions and inviting business. We had, I think, 84 people come to the last session, and we're just hearing from businesses, what do they need, we've had some guest speakers. We're going to sort of play it by ear on what the next few sessions are going to look like, but we took that team approach that we're all trying to talk to businesses. They're so busy, let's have all the agencies in one room talking at the same time.
Excellent, thank you. The other community that was running those workshops, Andrew, was Dufferin County. That's the area around Orangeville. I don't know if Jasmine or Yao or any of the folks from Dufferin County are on the call today. I don't see any hands going up quickly, but basically it was this notion that, yeah, sort of every other week they've got a different kind of expert coming in to facilitate a kind of a 2-hour discussion with local businesses around the current situation and what it means. And there's this sort of, they kick things off with a bit of a formal presentation and then just go right to the discussion. And it was interesting, in attending their first session yesterday, or Wednesday, I guess. A lot of the communities that I've been in touch with have been really concerned about the automotive sector. It was a real eye opener in terms of concerns in the agricultural sector when I got to that session in Dufferin County. very different issues, but also equally large in the context of some of our local economies. So interesting to kind of see how the discussion went in some really different directions when local businesses were given the opportunity to kind of lead that. Other thoughts, questions, concerns, ideas about what we can do before we? I guess we're a few minutes before the end of the hour. If we run long, that's okay. If ideas are still coming forward, but let's see if there's anything else that somebody wants to bring to the table. I see a new comment from Luke. Luke, do you want to share about your stakeholder engagement process?
Sure. So we met with stakeholders early in February, ranging from community development organizations, employment service providers, chambers, VIAs, and the EDOs in our area municipalities. And then from that formed a working committee, steering committee, that sort of meets on a regular basis to keep monitoring the tariffs and update the resources that we have on our hub as new information becomes available.
Excellent. Other thoughts and reactions here? I see Sarah.
Hi everyone.
Having given the shout out to Deloitte earlier on, Sarah, here you are.
I popped. I heard you somehow, Brock. Yeah. I just wanted to say that on our part, we are working with a number of communities who are interested in how to get statistically significant insights on where their business community is sitting. And so our triage BRNE survey option is something that is very popular right now. So I just wanted to contribute that to the conversation if it's not already on folks' radar. So it just would be a business employer survey that uses call outs or like a professional calling company to complete surveys to just get a better sample from the business community. What we're hearing is really similar to what was expressed, just that businesses are so busy and that it's hard to engage, hard to come out to events. Sometimes they're scrambling in some cases just to pivot left and right with all the changes. And so just getting a quick phone call, being able to answer a few questions is something that seems to still be working.
Excellent, thank you, Sarah. And again, I keep pointing people to that recent Deloitte report. Look forward to more things that may be coming out of your firm. There's some great stuff being done.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, they're scrambling right now, I tell you, to do updates from yesterday for the new Outlook. But in any case, busy team. Thanks, Brock.
Excellent. Thank you. And I see Danielle has just posted about some stuff that the Ministry of Agriculture is doing. So Danielle, maybe given how big ag and tariffs an issue is for many of our communities, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about the event that you've just announced in the chat?
Sure, happy to. Hi, everyone. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Community of Practice, the Ministry of Rural Affairs and the Ontario Federation of Agriculture offer these free online webinars every few months on different topics. So we thought it was quite timely to do one on a very similar conversation we're all having today about buy local and buy Canadians. So we'll have Foodland joining us as well as Ontario Made, and we're also looking for municipal examples. So we've reached out to our municipal networks to see, and if anyone on the call today, I saw there's some great toolkits and examples in the chat that we're making note of. So we'll be planning that over the next few weeks, and it's free to join. And so you can either join the email list or just join us for the webinar on the 10th, and it will also be recorded after the fact.
Excellent. Thank you, Danielle. I think that's a great opportunity, and my apologies for misnaming your ministry.
Oh, that's okay. It was OMAFRA, but now it's the Rural Affairs staff that have continued to collaborate with me on it. So thank you very much.
Excellent. I'm seeing that we're at 11 o'clock. The chat and the number of hands has slowed down. So let me maybe give one last call for people who have some thoughts, ideas, suggestions that they want to share. And if we don't get too much more, I may soon turn things back over to Stephanie for a bit of a wrap up. But let me put out the call one more time to see who's got something else they can share with us that might be of use. economic developers aren't a shy group. There's got to be somebody who's ready to say something here. All right, I see a thank you from John in the chat and from Sarah. I think it's great that EDCO is going to be doing this on a regular basis moving forward. I think the amount of change that we've seen this week, what that means in terms of what we're going to see over the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months, it's a little bit daunting. But I think we're stronger when we do these things together. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that so many of you have taken the time to be here today. I've appreciated the chance to kind of hear a little bit about what's going on in different communities. And there will be others who are going to facilitate these sessions moving forward. I will look forward to being one of the participants next time around, because I think the more that we can learn from each other, the better able to respond to this challenge. The better able we will be to respond to this challenge as it unfolds. So, Stephanie, let me turn things back to you for a few final words.
Yes, thank you so much, Brock. I appreciate your presentation and your time today to facilitate. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. As Brock mentioned, we will be continuing these and they will evolve as we feel our membership, what you need from us. So we'll continue to listen. There's some great feedback. You will see our website changing and adding some of this tariff information. We'll definitely take back some of your key points to the board and see how we can move forward. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I think that's it. And in the meantime, between now and our next session, if you have any questions, you need support in something, please feel free to reach out to Laura and myself. We are happy to align you with our ministry partners and assist in answering whatever questions we can. So have a wonderful day, and we appreciate the time that you spent with us today.